Hospital Port as pride and dignity stop the New World Order. Welcome to Hapanwo TV. Well, I've got something a bit amusing for you this evening. I thought, what the hell? It's Sunday afternoon. I want to do something a bit light-hearted. Well, hang on a minute. I'm going to treat this as a serious subject. I really am, because, well, you'll see why. And also, I've had a massive amount of correspondence from people asking me about this subject. This goes back several months. Now, I have addressed this on the Hapanwo show on Hapanwo Radio, and I've also written an Hapanwo Voice blog article about it, which you might have seen. If you have seen them, stay tuned, because I've got a bit of an update. There's a lot of stuff in this particular video which does not occur in that article or those radio shows. But it concerns aviation, and I'd never heard of this before. I honestly have not heard of this before, and I thought, well, when it comes to conspiracy theories, I'm the ultimate anorak, aren't I? I'm the tin-foil hat-wearing aficionado extraordinaire. I'm the creme de la creme kind of gourmet, you know what I mean? And I hadn't heard of this, so I thought, wow, that's something new I've got to look at. Well, the claim goes that there's several variations of it. It basically says that jet aircraft need no fuel. What they do is the jet engines run off compressed air. Now, this compressed air comes from two sources. Well, again, there's several variations on this, but the most popular theory is that the air is added to pressurized chambers on board the aircraft, and that is used, for example, for taxiing on the runway, for takeoff and landing and things like that, and for traveling at slow speeds. When the plane is in flight and cruising, the air comes from the atmosphere and is converted to a usable pressure by the jet engines. It's actually, but the pressurizer within the jet engines actually converts the air to a usable pressure. There's huge implications for this, of course. Now, if you want to know where did I find out about this, obviously from correspondence, but people sent me links to many source documents. Some of YouTube videos that were then removed. I managed to find them placed elsewhere, and also I'm going to cite a source which is a little bit controversial, but it's where you get some of the best material. I say best material, the most informative material on this particular subject, and that is the buildcasing.com. Now, I know what some of you are going to think, because of course Bill Casing, it's a tribute website to Bill Casing, and this is the news. Oh, hang on, what's that? Sorry, it's nothing. Don't ignore that. This was the website originally set up as a tribute site to Bill Casing, and is run by a chap called Albino Gallopini. Now, you may have heard of him because he is a big name within the moon landing hoax research community, and indeed I've corresponded with him myself a while ago. And he's worked closely with people like Jarrah White, and he runs the tribute site now. The thing is about Albino Gallopini is, unfortunately, he's gone flat. Yes, he has flattened himself. Now, this is a big problem within the Apollo host community. This is a bit of a digression now, but I should say a few words about this, seeing as I'm actually going to cite him as a source for this. As you know, the moon landing host community and the flat Earth community has a big overlap, and this has caused numerous problems, as I've explained. If you look at the Apollo detectives videos, and the fact that they had that guy on this morning who was a flat earther and things like that, and it's sad. I admit it's sad that ever since the moon landings happened and people started questioning them, the skeptics have always come out with the refrain, "Oh, you're just like flat earthers," comparing us to the Flat Earth Society and things like that. Unfortunately, in recent years, that has become literally true, and it's not something I approve of. Now, I don't I don't. This doesn't upset me as it does, for example, Jarrah White. I know how incensed he is by this, but I do understand the points he makes, and I don't think Albino Gallopini should be running Bill Casing's tribute site. I really don't. But as you know, I'm willing to debate with flat earthers. I have links in the description box to this video with them, and the reason is because there's a connection between the flat earth business and what I'm going to talk about this evening. So let's get into it. So that's digression over. Albino Gallopini. This is on news.billcasing.com. The great jet fuel hoax, free energy is real. Yeah, a recent discovery is that passenger airplanes. Well, anyway, I'll go into it in detail. All right, but this particular page is quite interesting because it has a number of downloads which you might find interesting. Okay, so this is the basic hypothesis. That, as I said, there's several different versions of this hypothesis, but it's several different points to make. One is that the aircraft could never store the fuel load designated as their capacity, either in terms of weight or volume. Now, in fact, in the title shots to this video, Scott, I'm itching again. I either itch or I yawn. You know it is. I either itch or I yawn or I cough, or all three when I'm speaking. But for example, the world's largest passenger aircraft is the Super Jumbo, the Airbus A380. Now, when you fill it up, it runs off kerosene fuel, and it's alleged to contain 83,291 gallons. If you have to forgive me for using the imperial measurements, but I always convert them as part of my anti-globalist, anti-EU stance. And this weighs altogether about 315 tons. And if you go to the various websites and the various videos, they compare this to like piling up a number of elephants on top of the wings, or a number of London buses or tanker lorries perched on top of the wings. The other claim is volume. There's just not enough space available aboard the plane to store 315 tons of fuel, 83,000 gallons of fuel. That's the claim. Now, there's to be honest, I don't have an. I'll come to answers in a minute, but they say things like you could prove this because the wings don't droop. I mean, there's a guy who has taken photographs of an aircraft, the same aircraft, fully laden for takeoff, and just after landing when its fuel is very low, and there's no change in the there's no sort of like drooping the wings. There's no change to the physical appearance of the plane. The cross section is exactly the same. Okay, so that's one of these things. I'll go into more details in a moment, but I don't actually have an answer for that right now. Not a complete answer. I have a partial answer, but I'll come on to that in a minute. Now, another thing they bring on is to do with modern jet engines. Now, most jet aircraft run off a turbofan engine. Now, a turbofan is what they say is the turbofan is a two-stage jet. The original turbojet, which is basically the turbojet burns fuel inside a combustion chamber, and air is forced into the combustion chamber by a system of fans which compress the air, add it to the mixture of fuel. It adds to the mixture of fuel and air, just like it does in a petrol engine. This then ignites, and you have an explosive effect which produces thrust. And indeed, on ramjets, when a plane is going very fast, the air simply is forced. There's no need for a fan for the compressor. The forward move of the aircraft does that itself, compressing the air. Now, a turbofan. If you look at how turbofan engines work, there's a turbojet inside them, but it only produces 10% of the thrust. And so the people who've come up with this theory say, well, where's the other 90% of the thrust coming from? And it is actually from air which bypasses the turbojet. You can tell the difference between a turbojet and a turbofan. A turbojet has a single exhaust nozzle, whereas a turbojet has a double exhaust nozzle. It has one in the middle and a one around it in a sort of bullseye formation. And they say, well, where's that 90% of thrust coming from? It's coming from this bypassed air. So therefore, it's not the turbojet which runs off the fuel. If that's not actually driving the aircraft forward, then what is? That's their question. The jet fuel hoax proponents also say that the presence of a large amount of liquid on board would cause inertia. Now that would mean basically that because the fuel is liquid, so you put it in these tanks and it sloshes around during tight maneuvers, so when the plane banks it would flow all over the place and destabilize the aircraft. It's rather like if you're carrying two large beer glasses which are full through a pub and someone jostles you, the beer goes everywhere, doesn't it? Now they say also it takes about it takes 45 minutes to refuel an A380. Now if you work that out, it means that the hose pipe has to be capable of about twice the flow rate of a fireman's hose, and the theorists say that this would essentially break the wing apart, because you've seen firemen's hose pipes, how powerful they are when they can break. Sometimes firemen use them to break open locked doors. So the question is, how at twice that rate, how could it not endanger the refueling worker should it break loose? Because you have a massive flow rate, would cause a huge amount of damage. Also, why doesn't it damage the aircraft? That's the question. And they also say, well, if it's generating heat from combustion, then surely that heat coming out the back of the aircraft would be dangerous. Now, if you go to a place called Saint Martin Island in the Caribbean, it's quite famous because there's a beach right next to the airport. There's some videos of this. Now, the beach is right at the end of the runway where the aircraft take off, and what happens is when there's a big sign up warning people on the beach that when the planes take off, there's a huge amount of exhaust stream coming from the aircraft onto the beach, and they warn people not to get in the way. But of course, tourists, being tourists, they like to play with it. They like to stand there in the exhaust stream of this jet and get blown around for fun. So why therefore do we not see people being burnt alive by the heat coming from this jet? If it's so hot, if all this heat, if it's all coming from burning fuel inside the engine, why do we not see people being burned to death and things like that? Why do we not see scorch marks on the wings? Because the engines, of course, if you look at a modern aircraft, the engines are mounted slightly forward of the wing, just underneath the leading edge. On pylons, these pylons underneath, I think that's, you know what I'm talking about here. Why do we not see scorch marks above the exhaust nozzle? So that's another question. Now, another guy says, how come it is whenever there's an air crash we don't see the wings? Now he points, this guy's produced a video, you can download it from Albino Gallipini's article, and it says why, when the plane crashes and the news crew get there, you see everything but you don't see the wings. And what he's saying is that the wings are all hidden. The wings are the wreckage that are first collected. The wings are always taken away so that this secret doesn't get out. So when a plane crashes, the crash retrieval teams, the firemen, everyone else, they have to get rid of the wings. Otherwise this secret might come out that planes don't need fuel. He also mentions there are spiral marks on the jet intakes on the what's the word? The axle, or the shaft, which connects the hub. I think that's the word. The hub of the fan. You have these little white spiral marks, and he says, "Oh, that's an indication of something to do with what's really going on inside that engine." I'm not sure. I'm not so sure anyway. But anyway, there's several different versions of this particular hoax. Basically, there are no fuel. There's no fuel. No fuel is kept on board the aircraft, or very little, just for running the auxiliary systems. And there's no fuel tanks. What there are, there's bunkers for storing compressed air, like cylinders, like gas cylinders, where high pressure air can be stored. Some people say there's no fuel at all. Some people say there's only fuel to run the auxiliary systems. There's different ideas connected to this. And indeed, if this is true, then it is a massive hoax, isn't it? It's a huge hoax. And the implications are phenomenal, because it means that, you can't even begin to discuss you can't imagine what it means. But first of all, everyone who's ever travelled by air since the jet engine was invented and used commercially has the right to sue the carrier for about half of their airfare, because that is the average proportion which covers fuel costs. These airlines are essentially, the entire aviation industry and air travel industry is defrauding the passengers. But that's one of the more trivial eventualities, even though that seems to be the prime concern of many of these people, not least all their connection to the flat Earth business, which I'll talk about in a minute. But really, that's one of the more trivial eventualities, because it also means essentially that airlines are operating free energy devices and they're not telling anyone. All of them are. They're using free energy right under our noses, and they're not telling us, and we don't know it. That's quite incredible, isn't it? Yes, but Ben, and everyone now is yelling at me. Ben, you don't believe this, do you, Ben? You don't believe it, do you? You don't? Come on, Ben, come on. Yeah, all right. There are major problems with this assertion. Don't worry, I'm not about to become a believer in the jet fuel hoax theory. Now, the first problem is, like, when it comes to the amount of weight and volume needed to store fuel, an aircraft fuel tanks are not just in the wings. They are in the centre of the fuselage too. In fact, on the title slide for this particular video, the title image, there's a diagram of a plane, an airline, and how the fuel tanks are arranged. Now, pilots have to be very careful when they are flying, or flight engineers, because they have to be careful to expend each fuel tank evenly to keep the plane balanced. Now, there's the problem of sloshing around the planes, the liquid just flowing around the place and destabilizing the aircraft. That's one problem. I mean, the thing is, like, first of all, if you took all the fuel from one wing first, then the plane would bank over, wouldn't it? Because it'd be weighed more on one side than the other. So you got to be careful using it at the same rate. But also, the sloshing is prevented by baffles. The fuel tanks are not just tanks which is just open. They contain metal struts called baffles, which prevent sloshing around. I noticed that the space shuttle fuel tank has the same thing. There's some amazing film actually from a space shuttle launch and a camera inside the fuel tank, and it shows how that works. There's actually a good channel which I recommend, and it's a channel called Mentor Pilot. Mentor is spelled Mentour, Pilot. It's this Swedish guy who's an airline pilot who does videos all about aviation. They're very interesting, and he actually does explain this. He doesn't address the jet fuel hoax. I'm thinking of bringing it up on one of his Q&As just to be cheeky. I did actually ask him about chemtrails and he never replied to me. I asked him if he'd seen a UFO as well and he never replied to me. Anyway, and there's more, right? And the jet fuel hoax theorists have a lot more to explain than just that. Even though I admit, when it comes to their issue to do with fuel refueling, the hose pipe, fuel volume and weight, I don't have a full answer for them. I really, really don't. Maybe other people do, but I can't completely explain that from my own pool of knowledge. However, there's more. Firstly, planes have crashed because they run out of fuel. Jet aircraft have crashed because they run out of fuel. In fact, this has happened 17 times since 1953. Why is that? If they don't have fuel to run out of, do the pilots stage the crash just to keep the secret? Does somebody shoot the plane down just to keep the secret? Now, the issue to St. Martin Island is an interesting one, because if you go onto YouTube and you'll see it. Now, I've got a few notes. I'm not actually going to play any of these videos. I've just got them up just so I have notes, because I'll need to look at notes while I'm doing this. But there's several videos of St. Martin Island. Where is it? I'll open a new thing here. St. Martin Airport, Jet Blast. Just go to video. You see the Jet Blast challenge. There's loads of videos here. Jet Blast blowing people away, and of course they just play around on the beach with it. It's very rare that anyone's actually hurt. They just play around in this Jet Blast as a kind of a tourist thing. They just hang onto the fence and cling on for dear life. Just fun, despite the warning signs telling them not to do that. But the reason, there's a reason actually why they don't get burnt to death in the flaming exhaust of this plane, and that is because there is no flaming exhaust, right? What it is like is because they're actually a great distance from the engine when it goes off. They're a great distance. The plane is on the runway ahead of them. It's at least 100 feet away, and so at that distance, they're not going to get burnt because the thermal energy is very low. Because a jet engine produces heat, yes, but it doesn't produce enough heat to burn someone up 100 feet away. It produces about as much heat as a back garden bonfire. Now, if someone's got a bonfire 100 feet away and the wind is blowing the heat towards you, you're not going to get burnt, are you? To get burnt, to actually suffer serious burns from a jet engine, you'd have to climb inside the combustion chamber. You'd have to get that close to the heat source. And another person said, yes, but why don't they suffocate? Because it's not just air coming out; it's kerosene, it's soot, it's the exhaust. It's like the exhaust of a car, isn't it? Which is releasing a whole load of stuff. You know that if you breathe that in, you're going to die because it's full of all kinds of pollutants, carbon monoxide, as I said, petroleum soot and things like that. Indeed, it's one of the ways people sometimes commit suicide, by breathing the exhaust from a car engine. Well, it's a bit different in this case because the tailpipe of the aircraft releases exhaust, but it's primarily just releasing air. I mean, there is the amount of toxicity you're going to get from a jet blast at 100 feet away is about as low as the heat problem, because it's very little. There's going to be no acute toxicity at that distance. If you stuck your head inside the tailpipe of the primary engine, you may not be able to do that for very long. But I mean, it's not the same. Besides, petrol engines are worse than most. I mean, I know that diesel fumes, for example, are not that poisonous. I know that petrol fumes are very poisonous because they contain carbon monoxide and lead and things like that. This is kerosene. It's another form of petroleum, so it's not the same as petrol. So the concentration of soot particles is very low at 100 feet. Now, incidentally, this is the reason. This is another aside. I'm not going to go into details here, and I have on previous videos. This is another reason why chemtrails have to be real. And I've discussed that elsewhere. I'll discuss that again, no doubt. So really, all those tourists on the beach are going to experience is a blast of strong wind coming from the aircraft. It's just literally going to be just a blast of strong wind, and that's why there's no scorch marks on the underside of the trailing edge of the wing either. Now the hoax theorists aren't beaten yet. They say that there's some kind of, I can't remember exactly what they say. Hang on, I don't think it matters particularly. But they say that the pylons mount the engines forward. Yeah, they do. Now there's a reason for that, and I can't remember what the hoax theorist said, and I'm not going to look it up now. But the reason that it's mounted forward, I looked this up, right? The reason that the engine is underneath the leading edge of the wing is to do with airflow around the engines, right? Because if an aircraft is moving in some angles of attack, for example, if it's ascending very sharply, like after takeoff, if the engines were right beneath the wings, then the wings themselves might block some of the air getting into the engine, so the engine has to be slightly ahead of the leading edge of the wing, so it gets a free, uninterrupted flow of air. Now, as for in air crashes, you don't see the wings. Now, I honestly don't have an answer for that because I haven't looked into it, but I do have to wonder if you're a paramedic or you're a fireman, or you're part of any of the emergency services, which might include me, incidentally, when I was a hospital porter. Why, when you're sent to go and get people out of a crashed plane, hope there's some people alive there and treat them, what in your training does anyone say to you at some point, hey guys, look, you've got to get rid of the wings first, okay? Just hide those wings somewhere. Don't know, break them up, put them somewhere so people can't see them before the news cameras arrive. Then you can go and rescue the injured people. I mean, it's not very likely, is it? But that being said, I can't explain why the wings don't droop when they're laden with fuel. Obviously, I mean, I've seen Dr. Judy Wood. I know that these are aluminium structures. Why don't they? I mean, it could be something to do with pressure or the way that the weight is distributed over a wide area, because the fuel tanks are low and they're flat. It could have something to do with that, because they're inside the wing itself, so they have to match in with this aerofoil shape you get in the wing. I don't know if it's something to do with that. Now, the spiral marks on the jet engine fan hubs, I know why that is, because Mentor Pilot explains it. They have this little spiral pattern on the hub. It's like that. The reason is because so people can see when the fan is turning. Because if it's turning, it's just like a blur. It's just warning people in a noisy environment. You can't necessarily hear which engine's on or off, because you don't want to get too near to the engine intake, because you could get sucked against the fan, things like that. Now, one thing they do, most of these hoax theorists admit, is there is some fuel on board the plane which runs the auxiliary power unit. Now, the auxiliary power unit is a very small turbojet, and you can see it on the plane because it's usually right at the back. There's usually a very small hole at the very back of the plane underneath the tail. That is the auxiliary power unit, and that is what is used to run the electrical systems of the plane when the aircraft is stationary or travelling very slowly, or when its engines are off. When its main engine's basically spooled down and it's not running its dynamo, so it has to run the electric systems of the plane, and it uses the auxiliary power unit. Now, that apparently is the only bit of the plane which uses fuel. It's the only real jet that uses fuel. The thing is, though, I mean, if you're going to go there, you have to ask yourself, why even have the auxiliary power unit at all? I mean, wouldn't a set of batteries be far easier? It'd be easier to maintain, easier to replace, things like that. Easy if it's not enough power, you could charge it more easily. So why not just have a set of batteries somewhere rather than this APU thing? Now, the answer you might get is you'd have to keep the batteries secret. Well, you'd have to keep everything secret, wouldn't you? You'd have to keep the fuel tanks secret. And if you're going to keep batteries secret, you might as well just say, well, what else you got to keep secret? Because you'd have to keep it secret from all the flight engineers. Now, this brings us onto the central flaw in the jet fuel hoax theory. How many people would be needed to keep the secret? How many people? Now, of course, I am well aware, and I've discussed this before, because this is one of the things that people like Steve Mumbling bring up, and they're right to ask these questions. How many people are needed to keep a particular secret? And I mean, there's a guy called Dr. David Grimes, who I've discussed before. He's a guy here in Oxford, actually. He lives here in Oxford. I've got to meet up with him and have a pint and put the world to rights at some point. Oh yeah, Steve Mumbling would love to be a fly on the wall in that discussion, wouldn't he? But anyway, he has a famous formula. What Grimes is basically saying is that it's not easy to keep a secret. There's a limitation on the ability to keep secrets. If you're cheating on your partner, it's only a matter of time before they find out. Word gets around, grapevine, scuttlebutt, whatever you want to call it. And this guy, Dr. David Grimes, has come up with this theory, this famous equation he calls his formula, which he reckons the moon landing hoax would have failed after a maximum of 3.7 years, the climate change lie would have lasted 3.4 years, the fake vaccine autism 3.15 years, etc., etc. Now, it's all based on just three factors, it's just that the factors are the number of people involved and how many would need to know. But he believes that they would just fall into two camps. He says that the only people involved in any conspiracy would be, one, active instigators, willing and malicious, or two, completely ignorant innocents who would immediately spill the beans if they heard a peep about it. But real conspiracies don't work like that. Compliance with a malevolent secret is maintained usually using organisational pressures like herding instinct, tacit subconscious agreement, veiled threats, blah-de-blah-de-blah, the Milgram experiment, etc. I'll probably put a link in the description box to one of those just to give you a bit of an idea of it. Maybe I'll just remind myself of that. So I'll just go down here and just have a... It's like the cancer cure thing, you know what I mean? And that's the thing. So yeah, I understand that there is a huge limitation here. There's a huge... Grimes' formula doesn't work. But even the most extreme examples of what I've talked about here, that is subconscious compliance, have their limits. Indeed, in Stanley Milgram's famous experiment, there were a small number of people who refused to press the red button. Some of them even stopped before hitting the red button. If you want to know what I'm talking about, just check the link in the description box. But basically, it was a test of human compliance and the obedience to orders without question, even very immoral and horrible things. So, in order for this conspiracy to be real, every single engineer who's ever worked, designed, or maintained jet aircraft engines would have to be in collusion. That includes Frank Whittle, the inventor of the jet engine, onwards. And that was way back in, I think that happened. That was some. Well, the jet engine was invented in several phases through the 1940s. Whittle was one of them. I don't know if he was the actual credited with the invention, but I know if you go to Coventry, they've got this Whittle Arch, which is this big thing over the crossroads, big steel structure, which is like a memorial to Frank Whittle. But you're talking also about the builders in the factories, the draftsmen, the technicians, the maintenance crew of every aircraft at every airport, and not just the aircraft, not just the people who fiddle with the engines and tick off the checklists, but the people who design and build the pressurized fuel delivery systems, the piping systems at the airports, the inspectors who measure consumption of fuel stores, the fitters of the gauges and pumps, the pilots would have to, and the in-flight engineers who have to measure fuel expenditure during flight. They have to while the plane is in the air, its weight changes. It gets a lot lighter as the flight goes on, as the fuel is consumed. The pilots have to take that into account because it affects the handling of the aircraft. It affects engine efficiency and things like that. The auditors at the oil refineries, the people who sell the fuel to the airlines, that would have to be, or allegedly sell it, but that would have to be done in as well. The auditors and accountants will all have to know. The bankers would all have to know. The list goes on. This conspiracy would be impossibly top-heavy, even take into account my criticism of the Grimes formula. And I mean, one of the things they say things like, well, how come there's no noise coming from when you get the refueling? What happens is the refueling lorries turn up at airports. There's some videos of this. When they refuel the aircraft, these big lorries come along, these big oil tanker lorries come along, and then they have a pipe which attaches to the aircraft's wing, and that's how they fuel the aircraft. And they say, well, how come you don't hear any noise of any engines on the truck? Why is the truck quiet? Because you need an engine for that to run that pump that's twice as powerful as a fire hose, because you need that for a fire engine, don't you? But you don't, you see, because what happens is, because the fuel doesn't come from the pump, from the tanker, it actually comes from a piping system underneath the airport, and there's like a hole in the ground, and what the tanker is just there to basically channel that fuel, which is under pressure, from the underground into the wing. That's what I've heard anyway. And maybe that's not the same at all airports. Maybe on some they do have a pump, I don't know. And what's interesting is that in one of these videos, the guy brings up something which is far more, I think, important, and I think it's, in a sense, it's something that's wasted on this particular theory, and that is inventors such as Victor Schauberger and Viktor Grebennikov. Now, ironically, it's just like with the flat Earth thing, because a lot of the flat Earth researchers, they bring up the moon landings. When they bring up the moon landings, they make really good points. You know, like Martin Kenny, when he was on This Morning, I think it was completely the wrong person to put on This Morning. They should have had Marcus Allen, they should have Andrew Johnson, they should have had Mary Bennett. Instead they had Martin Bloody Kenny going on about the flat Earth. But he did make some good points, and I mean they do. And this particular video makes some great points about these two guys, Viktor Schauberger and Grebennikov. These were two inventors, one was Austrian, one was Russian, and without going into too much detail, they both invented free energy. One in the 1930s and the other in the 1990s. Schauberger in 1930s Austria, Grebennikov 1990s Russia. And that's a big long story. I've covered it in other videos in more detail. I'll probably put a link in the description. Oh, bloody hell. I'm going to write in my hand here. Look, put link in description box to free energy. Alright then. I'm written on my hand now, alright? I should plan these videos better. Anyway, so there it is. I won't forget now. So what this guy says is that basically they're using a mixture of technology from Schauberger and Grebennikov, and they give there's a whole segment in this video about those two guys, and it's completely correct. The problem is, and then they say, well, it has to be that way because, and they bring up the way the turbofan engine works and says, well, look, the turbojet only produces 10% of the thrust, so where's the 90% coming from? It's coming from this air that bypasses the main engine. Well, the figure is true. 10% of the thrust on a turbofan engine comes from the turbojet. The other 90% comes from the bypass system where the air bypasses the turbojet. That's true literally. However, the thing about the turbojet is not there to produce thrust. As I said, it only produces 10%. The main reason the turbojet is there is to turn a crankshaft for the fan, this big fan at the front of the plane. And turbofans have a much larger fan system at the front than a turbojet. So the turbojet drives that fan, and the fan produces the thrust. That actually produces the thrust of the air. So the turbojet just produced 100% of the thrust. It only produces 10% directly. It produces the rest indirectly, simply through turning the crankshaft that turns the fan, and the fan produces the other 90%. Do you see what I mean? It's a two-stage jet engine. And it's far more powerful and efficient than just having a turbojet. It's driven by, you see, it's now, and this guy then goes on to say, it's a shame because he brings up these good subjects about Grebennikov, and he says, oh, well, they're using Grebennikov's system. You know why? Because Grebennikov's system was based on an anti-gravity electrogravitic effect of insect wings. And he says that's what the buzzing noise a bee makes is because of this. It's the vibrations caused by this electrogravitic effect. So bees essentially use anti-gravity. That's his theory. And there's actually some really good evidence to suggest that. Beetles as well possibly use anti-gravity. Why shouldn't nature have evolved to use these things? But he says when you get on a plane, what do you hear? You hear a buzzing noise coming from the engines. And the reason you hear a buzzing noise is because it's like the bees. It's making that same noise because it's the same electrogravitic effect that is powering, it's lifting and powering the aircraft. But, I mean, I admit that's true. I've been on a plane and I hear this buzzing noise coming from the engines. But you see, the reason I hear a buzzing noise, like a bee, is because that's simply how the vibrations sound when they're transmitted through the airframe. When you're inside the cabin, and you're hearing the vibrations, that's how they sound from inside the cabin. Now, you know, if a plane doesn't sound like that from outside, if you're standing outside a plane, it makes a noise that's more like a whining noise, isn't it? If you hear a plane go over, it sounds completely different. When you're in the cabin, you hear buzzing. When you're outside, you hear a whining, very loud whining noise. But, say the jet hoax theorist, but the planes, you notice when the plane eventually throttles its jets down, doesn't it? And they say that the jets are throttled down when the plane is cruising. That's what they say. So therefore, when the plane is cruising, it doesn't need the jets. It can throttle the jets down because it's using a compressed air system. It's basically a free energy effect caused by basically air being compressed. It's based on the Schauberger coil. Schauberger found a way simply to get energy out of water and air using a special kind of pipe. Very interesting. And it's true. But that's not the system aircraft are using. Yes, the pilots on the plane, they throttle the jet engine down. You notice this if you're on a plane. When the plane is at cruising altitude, the noise level goes down. Why? Because it doesn't take much thrust to keep a speeding aircraft going along, right? If it's at a level altitude, at 35,000 feet, where the air is much thinner, it's going to take a lot less energy to keep it going at 300 knots than it is if it's going from standstill at ground level to taking off and ascending. That takes a lot more energy. It takes lots more power. It's like if you're going up a hill in a car and you want to maintain the same speed as when you're on a flat level, you have to press that accelerator much harder, don't you? Same with a plane. When the car's level, you can use less gas on the engine. Same with the plane. Once the plane is level, it's flying at 35,000 feet. It's 300 knots. The air's much thinner at that altitude. So you could just leave the engine ticking over, right? But they don't switch the engine off. It's still running. If it didn't, the plane would eventually slow down and crash. Now, also you've got to ask yourself, right? If they really are if there's really pressurized air tanks aboard the plane instead of fuel bunkers, then these are going to be very heavy things because pressurized gas containers are solid metal shells. I mean, I know because I used to handle them at the hospital, and they're very heavy. They have to be because they have to contain this pressurized gas. So why is it that doesn't make the plane possibly too heavy? Now, again, I've got to come on to this subject. Like the channel where these videos are currently being hosted, at least some of them, is called Space Busters, and it's by a flat earther. And there is a lot of overlap here. I say this. It seems to be this jet fuel hoax thing is popular with the flatheads. I know maybe this is why Gallipini likes it, because the flatheads gravitate towards these kinds of things. And so this is an ad hominem attack. I know this is not why the flat earthers are wrong per se. And as I said, I think I'm more tolerant of the flatheads than, say, Jarrah White is and many other people. I'm willing to debate them. I'm willing to at least tolerate them. I don't think Gallipini should be involved in the Apollo moon hoax movement. I don't think he should be accepted. But I think, if he wants to believe what he believes, I'll just debate him. I debate flatties, don't I? I mean, I've done them on Panwell Radio. I've done a live stream on the Flat Earth, and there'll be a link in the description box of that. Don't worry. Just make a note there. Now, that's as I said, is an ad hominem, but it does mean, if this is an adjacent theory to the flat Earth, I question their ability to assess evidence. I might be wrong. There may be non-flat earthers who believe this jet fuel hoax. Okay, but at the moment it seems like it is a flat Earth particular proclivity. Now, free energy exists. It does. And there's many forgotten or underrated geniuses who developed it. And I mean Schauberger and Grubenikov, among many, many others. But these, and not to mention the work done on crash retrievals, that is extraterrestrial technology that has been secretly salvaged after it's come to grief on the Earth's surface and kept from the public. Roswell, for example, and many others like it. But these discoveries are appropriated by the government when they are made, and today they are used in secret only. For example, the secret space program. Now, it seems unlikely that this would be kept secret, and then it would be distributed for everyday use under everybody's nose. Why would they do that? And swear people to secrecy? Say, just tell all the engineers and all the technicians and everyone else in the oil companies and everyone else at the airports, do you mind keeping quiet about this? All right, we're not actually using any fuel, but don't tell anyone. It doesn't make sense. I can't see how free energy firstly would be a carefully guarded secret, which it is, and secondly used in everyday air travel under the noses of all the people who work and use it and use air travel. I'm open to new ideas at all times. I'm open to emergent facts, and so I say this to the people who've written to me, the many people, and I know some of you will probably be watching this. If you can demonstrate to me successfully that commercial airliners really do run off compressed air under a free energy system and they don't actually use fuel, go ahead. But right now I'd say that free energy exists, and jet aircraft work exactly the way the official story tells us they do. They use fuel. They use a standard jet engine, and I've not seen anything else otherwise. So I hope that brightened up your Sunday evening. And thank you for watching Hapanwo TV. Hospital Porters, Pride and Dignity, stop the New World Order.